So I want to go ahead and go through the Bar-Ilan essay, right? Because what he's trying to do is get us to think about these two different creation stories, which I think is kind of a helpful perspective, right? Just to sort of sort through, the differences between these two creation stories, right? And he makes it very clear in the beginning, this is what I'm doing, I'm looking at these differences, and he writes, the aim of this paper, therefore, is to analyze the essential differences between the two stories, and there are 6. Right, so it's the aim of the stories, time versus space, the power of the word, order and law, the role of numbers, and that one is a sermon versus a story, right? So the aim of the stories, we got, in the first, there's a protagonist, God, right? And the aim is to glorify God as creator. He says in the second, there are several protagonists, right? And the bottom line of the second is that man has to toil hard for his living, woman has to suffer, and wild animals will threaten man's existence. He says this is an etiological story. This explains, he says, the destiny of human beings, why the world is the way that it is, right? Second, he says that it's time versus space, and you can actually check this out on the slide. I've actually written some of these things down for you guys to be able to check it out. So time versus space. In the first one, time governs, right? And there are different types of time, right? Other than God himself, time governs the world, and there is no specific space. In the second story, it's space-oriented. The narrator depicts the Garden of Eden, the venue of the story, by giving a geographical dimension, right? And the importance of a location is augmented by the fact that man is expelled from this territory, right? So time orders it, and the second one, space orders it. There's also the power of the world, or the word, In the first story, the word of God is his tool to create the world, so the power of speech is evident. In the second, God does not use his speech ability as a tool of creation. Rather, man uses it to impose his own supremacy. Interestingly, also, you'll notice that in one, God seems to be over all things, right? And in the second creation story, God is anthropomorphized. God is actually more like a human and doesn't seem to know where the humans are. They play like this game of human divine hide and go seek. We've also got order and law. The first story is marked by the order of numbers, right? And in the laws. So although the term law and order do not appear in the first story, it's clear they were there from the very beginning. In the second story, there's no order. It's not even applied, and there is no law. As a matter of fact, God decreed one law, don't eat from the tree, but after a short while, this law is transgressed, and chaos seems to dominate the world. In brief, God goes together with time and order, while humans, he says, go together with space and disorder. He also points out the role of numbers, right? In the first story, numbers are the spine of the story. In the second story, 640 words, and only 6 are number words, right? And finally, he says the first story is full of formulas, right? This is a sermon. There's a tight structure. And the second story, he says, is the craft of a narrator. The first one is a speech, he says, made by a speaker, a preacher, a priest, a prophet. If you look to the slide, right, what you'll notice then is that I've offered some other things as well, which we'll look at in the next videos as we look at Gray and at McGilligan, because they point out sort of the differences and thoughts about a particular language that's used.